Since you refuse to move out of this chair, I'm assuming you will be the one recording your knitting podcast today. What did you knit? Did you knit anything special recently? Okay, you have to go. Hello and welcome to another episode of my podcast. I'm so happy that you decided to join me today, so please grab a drink, grab your knitting or any other project you're working on, and let's get started. We're gonna start with the finished objects as usual, and while I know why you clicked on this video, you will have to wait. My first finished object is actually my Amy Slipover. I'm really happy with how this came out. It's super warm and it's really fun to style with different tops. I actually have a few tops that I thought of maybe decluttering because I didn't wear them as much and I didn't know what to kind of wear them with. But now they're in a sort of renaissance because of this slipover. As you can see, it's on the purl side right now because I found out that it's completely reversible. It doesn't have any obvious seams. And I was also careful to hide my ends in a really kind of inconspicuous way. So now I wear it both on the stockinette side and on the purl side. And actually on the purl side, the metallic thread in one of the yarns I used is a lot more prominent and it makes it look kind of more glittery. These freaking ties took a long time to knit. Well, shocker, because the pattern asks for more than 400 stitches for each of the tie. And I think I cast on less than that. I also definitely did less rows than the pattern suggests for this ribbing, just because when I looked at the finished objects, the longer ribbing here makes it look kind of like a t-shirt. And even with all the corners I cut or like design decisions I made, it was still a lot of repetitive work. But you know what they say about knitting? Knitting is never repetitive, it's rhythmic. So it was a lot of rhythmic work. And also, fun fact, the pattern asks you to bind off in an Italian bind off, but doesn't give you any instructions for how to do that. And also it asks you to rearrange your stitches from 2x2 rib into 1x1 rib before you start the Italian cast off. And again, surprisingly, it doesn't give you any instructions for how to do that. So this pattern feels more like a recipe that doesn't go into too much detail. I think I saw a few free Lana patterns that were a lot more thorough than this. I'm not saying it's a bad pattern, it just, again, feels more like a recipe. It's like a 6 out of 10 pattern, but I do really like the finished object. It's technically finished, but I think I might actually go back and add more length on this ribbing on the turtleneck. As I said last time, I gave up at about 17 centimeters, and when I wear it, I can feel the lack of those extra 3 centimeters, and considering I have a ton of yarn left over, I think I might just go back and add more. I didn't do the Italian bind off here, and of course I didn't do it here because I would have gone insane. 400 stitches. First you have to rearrange them into 1x1 rib, and then you have to do the Italian bind off on this like Mohair. No. I'm glad I did the regular long tail cast off. On this black yarn you literally cannot tell the difference. Oh, I also did a little oopsie while I was knitting this. I made a mistake. When I was knitting the back, I did what the pattern suggests. I continued the garter border into the ribbing. Garter border, I can't say it, it's a lot of R's. I did exactly what the pattern says on the back. And then when I was knitting the front, I completely forgot to continue this detail to the ribbing. I just switched to regular ribbing. This is, as usual, gonna be our little secret, and thankfully it's a black yarn, so you can't really see anything. Moving on, I also used my leftovers of leftovers to make these cute bows to give to my friend for Valentine's Day. This was, of course, the leftover yarn which I showed last time. This one is technically a Sophie scarf, but it's just arranged to look like a bow. I just wanted it to be a little bit of a different shape than this one, and I just hope she likes them. Just to compare, this is how big my December bow is compared to this little one. Not much to say about these. I really enjoy knitting December bows. If I could, I would just knit them daily and just, you know, just churn them out. They're really convenient to knit on the go, and also, again, a great stash buster and make a really nice gift. Assuming a person likes to wear bows in their hair. I apologize for this little continuity break. It's the next day because I completely forgot that my internet was supposed to be rewired yesterday. So yeah, I had to cut my filming short, but I'm back. I wanted to show you a project that I think we all wanted to see finished finally, and me most of all, because I spent basically all of last week knitting, re-knitting, trying again, frogging, cutting yarn, splicing yarn, undoing weaved-in ends, vacuuming Lopi fluff from around the house. It was quite frustrating by the end, but now it's finally finished, and I'm of course talking about my Lumme sweater. I wanted to thank you for all of your nice feedback that I received on my last video when I showed it. And if you follow me on Instagram or you saw my projects on Ravelry, you probably know that it's already finished. But for those of you who haven't seen it, here it is, not on the needles anymore, blocked and looking good. If only my 2018 self, who was knitting these like really wonky rectangular sweaters, could see this, I think she would have been really proud of me. It feels really satisfying to see my knitting skills and experience kind of come together in this project. I was going for full-on like porcelain jug or like vintage teapot vibes with this color scheme, which meant that I had to modify the original pattern a lot, and it's in no way a negative comment on the pattern. I adore the Lumme sweater pattern. It's such a classic at this point. I think that colorwork patterns, especially compared to some other styles and techniques, have so much potential for modifications and like different takes on the same pattern, just because you can swap out the motifs, you can mix and match them, you can select different colors or merge a few patterns together if you want to. Like, the potential is endless. Different knitters can come up with so many different takes on the same pattern. It's just really creative and really fun to see. Also, I personally do not enjoy knitting colorwork. Maybe somebody does, but I find no joy or satisfaction in having to manage floats, being mindful of my tension, following charts, and doing this really specific thing with yarn when it gets tangled. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I hate it, to be honest. When I knit colorwork, I do it not for the process. It's never a process knit for me. I do it only for a really specific finished object I have in mind, which means that all of the modifications and like ideas I have to be at least partially planned out in advance. And for this project, I knew that some of the things that I envisioned, I would only be able to see if they work or not after I knit them up and like check how it looks on the garment itself. So it was a lot of trial and error with this one, which wasn't that bad of a process. It just took a lot of time, but it mostly was really fun and creative. Especially at the beginning when I was knitting the yoke and I just saw my color scheme kind of come together for the first time and saw how the colors I selected worked in this pattern. It was really exciting to see. And yeah, I had to modify a lot about this pattern, and I'm gonna go through all of the modifications I made. So if you're not interested in this part, you can skip to this timestamp. But for those of you who are interested, let's start. I have my notes in front of me and there are a lot of them. So let's begin. First, a few general notes. I was knitting a size 4. I used 5mm needles for the body and 3.5 for the ribbing. I did not go down a needle size when I was knitting just in the main color because I just found it to be unnecessary. In the pattern, you have a full-on like stockinette portion after you're done with the yoke. But since my sweater is just an all-over colorwork sweater, I didn't find it necessary to change the needle size. And regarding the ribbing, the original design has 1x1 rib, but I switched to 2x2 rib just because I like it more, and I did a mock neck instead of a regular like folded neck, I think it asks for. I might have cast on a different number of stitches just to make sure that my stitches are divisible by 4 for the 2x2 rib, but I don't remember, it was at the very beginning. After I was done with the ribbing, I started to knit the yoke, and this pattern has 2 yoke charts and 3 sleeve charts for colorwork. I only worked with yoke chart 1. I didn't reference any other charts or motifs. Everything you see here on the sweater is from the first chart for the yoke. I knit this chart until round 41. It finished basically around here. It was the end of this big flower. And round 41 is your last round with yoke increases. After that, I did one more round of stockinette and switched to my repetitive motif. This was a combination of rounds 1 to 6 of the first chart, so this gave me this leaf motif, 3 rounds of just stockinette, and then this dot motif, which is basically you alternating a contrast color in the main color every stitch. And when I was knitting this yoke, I was doing 2 rounds of just the main color in between the motifs, but when I separated for the body and sleeves, I switched to 3 rounds of stockinette in between the motifs, and I'll get to why. Also, once I was done with the flower motif, I mirrored the leaf chart to give the pattern more of a directional interest. I just screenshotted the chart and mirrored it in my phone photo editor, whatever. I contemplated maybe trying to alternate the direction every time I do a repeat, but I tried that on the sleeve and I did not like how the stitches lined up. It looked really spirally, so I unraveled it and tried with just one direction for the body and the sleeves. And the reason why I have so many stockinette rows in between the motifs is, first of all, because I wanted to make it easier on myself, and I wanted to have some just plain stockinette rows to look forward to after all this color work. And the second reason is because of shaping. This pattern gives you two options in the instructions. You can either raise the back with some short row shaping after you separate for body and sleeves, or you can skip the shaping entirely. I knew I wanted to do some shaping because, well, this sweater, for example, doesn't have any shaping. It's completely reversible. It doesn't have a back. It has, I think, the jog somewhere on the sleeves, so it's completely the same on the back and the front, and I can feel it. I sometimes wish there was shaping in this sweater, so I knew I needed to have some shaping. I have to raise the back at least a little bit with this one, which was super tricky because all of the shaping the pattern gives you instructions for is after you're done with the color work. It meant that I needed to find a way to incorporate the shaping without breaking the flow of the color work pattern. And after some trial and error, the thing I came up with was to cram a few more like rounds of just the main color at the back here to raise it a little bit more, and also add one more round of this dot motif. And it gave me 11 rows to work with, which was plenty to just raise the back a little bit. And I think it was the best way to try and add shaping without changing too much or like breaking the color work pattern too much. After that, I just decided to continue with one round of the dot motif, 3 rounds of stockinette, leaf motif, 3 rounds of stockinette, dot motif again. You get the idea. I also like the sparseness of these motifs because it makes the sweater not look too stripy from afar. Like it isn't too busy, I think. And also very important, when you split for the body and the sleeves, make sure that you move your beginning of the round on the body into the underarm. So just stop knitting here and join a new strand of yarn and continue in the underarm, because my only regret about this sweater is this really prominent jog when I was knitting the yoke. I wish I could go back and redo it, but I only noticed it after I weaved in the ends. But thankfully I was weaving in my ends on the yoke before I continued knitting the body, before I did the short rows, so I just promptly switched my beginning of the round and hid my jog on one of the underarm sections. Also, when you split for body and sleeves, make sure that total stitch count for the body after you cast on the underarm stitches is divisible by 6. Or if it's not divisible by 6, for example, you have 2 or 4 extra stitches, you can hide them or like decrease them on the back when you're doing the shaping. I think it's going to be the easiest way to do it. Before we move on to the hem, I want to briefly talk about the sleeves. There's not much to say about them, but first of all, you also need to make sure that your total stitch count for the sleeve is divisible by 6. So the stitches you kind of pick up from the underarm section need to help your total stitch count be divisible by 6. I'm losing my mind, I'm sorry. Anyway, I first wanted to taper the sleeves, and it was a bad idea. I finished one of the sleeves that way, and it was such a hassle to manage the decreases and keep the color work pattern aligned. And when I finished that sleeve, I realized I do not remember, literally cannot tell how frequently I decreased, how many stitches I started with, how many stitches I ended up with. I just forgot everything, so I decided to make it really easy on myself. I unraveled the sleeve and made it without the decreases, so it's just a straight tube with the stitch count divisible by 6. And regarding the cuffs, my first attempt at knitting the cuffs was just to stop doing the color work motif and go straight to knitting the cuffs in a contrasting color, which kind of made the cuff look unfinished and like something was really missing from that section. So I unraveled it. I drew a really simple motif in Stitch Fiddle. I will insert it on the screen so you can screenshot it. I basically wanted to do these little triangular sections of the color I would use for the ribbing before I start doing the ribbing, just so it kind of crowns the cuff. And of course, since I was doing a 2x2 ribbing, I picked up a couple of more stitches around the cuff to work the correct number of stitches. I also did not do a tubular bind off for the cuff. I just bound off in a long tail cast off, double crocheted around the edge. After I was done with both sleeves, I was convinced that I was on the finishing line with this sweater, which absolutely wasn't the case. My version 1 of the hem was to repeat this small blue motif right here before I start the ribbing, and I did that. Then I did a short ribbing section, and I really disliked it. I didn't know what was bugging me about it, but I kind of slept on it and decided that the thing I really wanted to do was to split the hem. And my thinking was that I put a lot of effort into like 70% of this sweater. I shouldn't skim out on the last 30%, so I split the hem, and I was regretting this decision a lot when I was doing it. I like it now, but the amount of colorwork purling I had to do was not cool. And also, before blocking, this split section was curling on itself so much, I really wasn't sure if blocking was gonna fix it. And I was fully prepared that after I block this, I will have to go back and frog the whole hem section and do it again, and I was just praying that it blocks out well, which it did. Thankfully, I ended up splitting the hem after the last leaf motif before I started doing the motif before the cuff. I knit the ribbing on the back to be the same length as my mock neck, and on the front I knit it to be exactly half of that. And regarding the crochet border, I first did a round of double crochets in white around this V section, so on the sides of both splits, and then I did a round of double crochets in green around the cast off edge. But when I got to this V section that I already kind of crocheted around in white, I did a single crochet instead, just to make the stitches lay flat on the sides as opposed to being this like tall border. I'm still not 100% happy with this hem, but it is what it is. I first tried to crochet around in just green, but when I got to this section where there was still color work, it merged really sloppily into the white. So I decided to kind of neaten it out in white before I did again the single crochets in green, and I really like this effect. It's seamless when you look at it from afar, but at the same time these double crochets in white really kind of tie it together. It's one of those things where you may have not noticed it, but your brain did. I'm glad that the hem worked out, but I don't recommend splitting the hem. Don't do it, please. And I think that's all I wanted to talk about in terms of construction and like color work changes I made. But regarding the actual colors, I think you can kind of clearly see what my color choices were just by looking at the pattern. But the only interesting thing to note is that the beige grayish I used on the cuffs and on the neckline is actually different from the one I used for the dot motifs. I first tried to use this grayish color, but it was completely sinking into the white. You couldn't see any contrast in there. It looked more like a mistake or marling effect as opposed to actual colorwork motif, however small it was. So I decided to try it in this darker color I had, which is the leftovers of my Oatmeal Heather color from this sweater. And even though they are different, like I can see that it's a different colorway, I don't think, again, your brain kind of registers it from afar because it just looks like a beige color that is contrasting to white. But this one is popping more because it's a big ribbing section, and this one is just popping more because it's darker. So it's just a little fun fact that they don't look that different, but they are, and it wouldn't work with just this color if I used it for the dot section. So make of it what you will. All the other colorway names will be in the description, and I will also try and remember how much of each colorway I used, but it's gonna be hard because I wasn't really keeping track of it, which I really regret now. Yeah, anyway, I'll try and like deduce for you. And I think that's all. At least that's all I can remember. I feel like, again, I blocked out most of this experience just because of how much I had to redo. It was all really worth it in the end, and if you end up making a similar version of Lumme, please tag me, let me know. I would love to see it. As I said, this design has so much potential for reinterpretation and reimaginings, like any good classic actually does. So yeah, tag me if you ever do your own all-over colorwork porcelain Lumme version. I want to thank you again for all of your kind comments about this sweater. It really picked me up after, again, a frustrating experience trying to finish this. I also think it would be really cool if the original designer does her own kind of reinterpretation of her Lumme and makes it into an all-over colorwork pattern. That would be really fun to see. And in general, knit a Lumme, please. It's such a wonderful pattern. Like, it's just one of my favorite patterns, which is weird to hear from me considering I never did it exactly to the original, but as I said, that's the joy of knitting a colorwork pattern. You can just make it into whatever you want. And to wrap up my kind of review and reveal of the Lumme sweater, I wasn't expecting it to be this warm. I wore it a couple of times and I love it, definitely, but it's one of the warmest sweaters I knit. I think mid-spring will be the prime time weather for this sweater just because of how warm and outer garmenty it is, but I enjoy it just as much right now. I just really like the sweater. It came out super duper oversized. One of the reasons I did so many repeats of the main color in between the colorwork motifs is because I wanted the yoke to be really deep. And I'm really glad it is, because my original Lumme, the first one I knit, is a lot less oversized and it's not a good layering piece, to be honest. But this one definitely is. So yeah, I really adore this sweater, but surprisingly I have even more stuff to show you in this video, so let's continue. My lips are starting to crack from talking too much, but anyway, I have 2 more finished objects to show you, and honestly, this feels just as satisfying as Lumme, but in a different way. I really love the fact that I can knit myself really practical stuff and just kind of close almost any gap I have in my wardrobe with my knitting, so this is kind of the vibe of the next finished objects. I got my hands on this vintage slash thrifted yarn. I have never seen a ball band like this before, where it doesn't specify what meterage this yarn is, which made it kind of tricky to find a project for it, but I picked it up in the first place because of this color. It was 5 balls of this beige color and 1 in this off-white, but I really wanted this bundle because of this beige specifically. It is a really nice basic beige, which sounds bad, but it's not. Like, it's just not peachy and not too gray, so it's just the color I really wanted to have for some accessories I had in mind. And I knit myself a really simple self-drafted, if you can even call it that, hat. I just used 5mm needles for the ribbing, did not do any decreases on the crown before the very end. I just decreased it for a couple of rounds evenly and then kind of cinched it in with the yarn, and that's it. That's the finished hat. I usually, when I knit ribbed hats, I don't do tubular cast-ons. I just do a kind of neat long tail cast on. And when I knit the hat, I make sure that the brim, when it's turned, is on this side of the long tail cast on and not on this side. I just don't like it as much. And I had a ton of yarn left over, but again, no idea how much it was in meters. So I decided to like try and wing myself a neck warmer, which I'm really happy with. This is also completely self-drafted. I did put a lot more thought into this neck warmer than into the hat, of course, just because it wasn't just a tube of ribbing, but I was ready to unravel or just maybe frog it all together in case I didn't have enough yarn or I didn't like some of the stuff I tried to do while knitting this. But in the end, I'm really happy with it. It's super warm. I used 5.5mm needles for the kind of body stockinette section and 6mm for the neck ribbing, just because I wanted it to be a lot more soft and kind of drapey, as opposed to the ribbing on the hat, which I wanted to sit really firmly on my head. And I don't know, maybe next season I will try and write up a pattern for this. Maybe it's going to be a free pattern, probably with a different yarn, because again, this yarn is a mystery yarn. My main kind of design detail is that I did an I-cord edge. And the way I joined the I-cord seamlessly on the side and on the bind-off edge, I just did a little secret Kitchener stitch for just 6 stitches. So 3 from this end and 3 from this end. And I think it's seamless enough. You can see that it isn't a single line of I-cord. So yeah, a little secret of the trade for you. But anyway, I'm really happy with these projects. I'm not sure what to do with the remaining yarn, but I think the obvious choice would be to make a matching pair of mittens. Maybe I will leave it for next season and will try and make myself a pair of thrummed mittens. That would be fun. And yeah, let's move on to works in progress. I'm in a bit of a pickle regarding my Chantal sweater. I completely stopped knitting it because I am at a loss. I don't know what to do with it. When I recorded the last podcast, was on the point where I needed to join the back and the front for the body section, and I did that, and I knit a couple of rounds and realized that my slip stitches, the ones that you kind of do every second row all over this pattern, are way too tight when I'm knitting in the round. And first of all, it's really uncomfortable to knit. It feels like I'm knitting a really tight basket, and also I can see already, like I can't see it in real life, but I can see in my head that when I finish the sweater, even if I power through and deal with the really tight stitches, I will have this line where you can clearly see where the fabric went from knitting flat to knitting in the round, and I don't want that. And it didn't feel tight at all when I was knitting it flat, so it's completely a in the round issue. And I also tried to do the slip stitches on the purl side, and it was just as tight. I decided it would be a genius move to maybe just not join the front and the back and knit them flat and just seam them up on the sides. And I was really happy with my decision. I thought it was, again, a genius decision. I just kind of left the few rounds I did in the round already and decided to just turn rows again after that. Then it dawned on me that I still need to knit the sleeves and I probably will have to have a seam on the sleeves too, which feels like too many unnecessary seams. And because again this pattern has a slip stitch motif, I feel like if you knit it flat you will have this like almost an I-cord edge just because of the slip stitch, which will make it kind of hard to seam it together in a neat way, in like a seamless way. So I don't know, should I frog it? Maybe before it's too late, I can just knit something else with this yarn. I am technically a part of the Chantal knit along, but is it worth it? Like, I don't want to have this visible line, and I also don't want to have seams everywhere on this sweater, so maybe I should frog it. What do you think? A more fun work in progress, a real palette cleanser I'm working on is my cloud sweater, which is a Petiteknit pattern, and to be honest, I think I need to ban myself from knitting more Petiteknit patterns because it's just becoming too convenient for me. Like, my first thought when I started to contemplate unraveling this was to maybe do, you know, a Petiteknit pattern instead. There are so many beautiful patterns to try and so many interesting designers to check out that I feel like the genius of Petiteknit overshadows everything, you know? She is way too good at those like really simple, really straightforward knitting patterns, especially for like simple stockinette garments, that it's such an easy road to take to just knit her pattern instead, especially because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and like the more people try it, the more people talk about it, and the more people want to try it, and she's already really popular as it is. So I decided to allow myself one more for now, and once I'm finished with the cloud sweater, I will not knit any more Petiteknit patterns for the foreseeable future, unless I pick up my Maggie cardigan, which is a project I'm not gonna get into, but there was also a little pickle with that one. In any case, this one I basically started because I needed a palette cleanser after my Lumme. I wanted something really simple, something with really clear and like easy detailing, and also because I knew I needed a stockinette project for this yarn. I showed you last time the hand-dyed mohair I bought. I bought the solid fuchsia color and also this variegated one to go with it, and the more I swatched, the more I realized I don't like this variegated. This is how it looks like in a cake, and it looks really muddy. I just really don't like it. I was 100% sold on how it looked in a skein, and as soon as I saw it in a cake, I knew that it wasn't gonna work. I tried to cast on, as I told you last time, a Stockholm sweater slash cardigan from it, but I knit about this much before I realized that I don't like this fabric. And the only thing that made me want to buy this yarn in the first place was actually this color and this color only. So as soon as I introduce more shades into it, I don't like it. I'm not that into pinks or like bright colors in general, so I knew if I want to have a banger project from this yarn, I need to use it on its own. So I messaged my favorite yarn store, which is Yarna, Ukrainian yarn store, mentioned it many times. I sent them a picture of this yarn and asked if they have a similar mohair in the same shade. They directed me towards a couple of options I can choose from, and I chose this mohair, which is Soft Dream. I mentioned it before. They're a little different in shade. For example, this one has almost a silvery thread, and this one is just more of a beetroot color, to be honest, but they work really nice together. And I also, of course, added my favorite yarn, which is Iren, which is this thin merino. In the end, these three yarns gave me a really beautiful fuchsia fabric, and the gauge was perfect for the cloud sweater, so I cast it on. I really like working on it. It's super simple, and I'm kind of going out of my comfort zone, if you can call it that, by doing this stockinette neckline. I've never done this before. I've never done a sweater where you can just cast off the stockinette section and let it curl like that, so it's kind of new to me. On the shoulders, the pattern also asks you to knit in reverse stockinette, which is a fancy way to say do some purl stitches on the right side. Instead, I did this garter ridge to make it kind of pop more, and I didn't do the reverse stockinette on the sleeves. I just started to knit in regular stockinette. So I knit one of the sleeves already, and I actually reknit this cuff section, redid it in a smaller sized needle because the pattern has you knit everything in 4.5mm needles. I found that my ribbing section here was just way too wide and wonky, so I went down to 4 instead. And in general, if you knit this sweater, my little tip is to still go down a needle size when you're doing the small ribbing sections. And I just need to continue knitting forever in stockinette on the body and then do the second sleeve. I think I'm gonna do the sleeve first, just because this is all I have left of this original hand-dyed mohair and I don't want to risk it. I don't want to play any yarn chickens. So I think I'm gonna cast on the second sleeve tonight. But to be honest, I don't think I will run out of yarn. This goes quite a long way, so I don't think I'm in any danger, and I'm just really excited about this project. I really love this haul. It makes me really happy. Unlike this one, which I think I'm actually, sorry to say, I'm gonna destash it. I don't have the space for the yarns I don't like. It's a beautiful yarn, but I don't really know how to use it on its own without buying more yarn to go with it. For example, to kind of wash it out with white. And the only idea I had so far is to do those mohair flowers. At the same time, how many mohair flowers do I need in my life, you know? Where do I even put the flowers? Like, do I plop them onto this sweater? Like, I don't know. I think I'm probably gonna destash it and just let it go. Anyway, I don't have to decide right now, do I? Whatever. I'll let it sit in my yarn stash for now. Speaking of my yarn stash, I have some acquisitions to show you, and they are all project-based, so I bought them specifically with a project in mind. So here's the thing, I'm on a mission currently to find as many beautiful small scarf, shawl, shawlettes, bandana patterns that are not a Sophie scarf. And the one I like the most so far is the Elise scarf, which I want to thank this freaking pattern because I haven't even started yet, and I already go around every day being like da 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 da, because it's called Elise, like it's an Elise scarf. So thank you for that. I went into my local yarn store specifically to buy some yarn to make this pattern from, because unfortunately all of my mini skeins that I got in my advent are too small of a quantity to make this scarf. So I decided I want to buy something specific for it. So I bought these two mini skeins and this mohair to go with it. And yes, I am back in 2017. I successfully invented a time machine into 2017, because if you were there, you remember that mauve was like the color. I remember these like mauve matte lipsticks. Or was it before 2017? Remember mauve? It was a big deal. I remember it was a big deal. So yeah, I just haven't thought about this color in a while, but I still think it's a really pretty color. And I really like this combo. This yarn is kind of gray with some mauve, and this is silk mohair that is gray with mauve fluff around it. So I think once I knit it up, it will kind of merge, but I wanted it to be in skein form so I can show it to you on the podcast. And this silk mohair is from a company I haven't heard of before. It's called Filamo, and as far as I understand, it's a Ukrainian brand as well, so supporting local brands. And in general, I just really like the Elise scarf pattern, even though I haven't started it yet. A really simple, sleek lace work and the classic garter and I-cord detail around the edges. So I'm really excited to try it. And I think once I'm done with my cloud sweater, I'm finally gonna start another complicated project, which I don't think cables are that complicated, but compared to the cloud sweater, it will be complicated. I finally found a perfect, beautiful, not too much moss stitch cable pattern that I wanted to try, and it's the Sirena or Sirena sweater by Cookie the Knitter, who by the way has really beautiful designs, and I kind of want to knit all of them. I think I have her t-shirt pattern already. I bought it last year but haven't made it, so maybe this season I will make a t-shirt from her pattern as well. But yeah, for now my main goal is to make the Sirena sweater from this yarn held double. I just really wanted to work with something shiny after my Amy slipover, so I decided to try this yarn, which is again from Yarna. I'm sorry you can't get it, but I'll try and find some dupes for this yarn from different companies that are more kind of widely available for you to try. But this is a DK weight yarn, and unfortunately, because it's a chain net yarn, it's really thin. It's a lot thinner when you're knitting with it than it is in the ball. So I'm gonna hold it double, which means that for this sweater, I'm gonna need 22 balls. I already bought 18 and I need to buy more, but I'm doing this like self-Klarna thing with this yarn. It's not that expensive, but I just tried to redo my math a couple of times to make sure I really need 22 balls and not less, but no, math is math and I do need 22 balls. This yarn is mostly viscose, so it's 70% viscose and just 26% alpaca. And I think it's gonna be perfect for this like in-between season sweater that is cabled but at the same time not as heavy, because for example my waffle loop, which I really love, it's really heavy. It's, well, not outer garmenty as my Lumme because it's not that woolly, but it's still a substantial layer when you put it on. So I want to make this one more airy, and I think even though I'm gonna hold this yarn double, it's still not going to be too heavy to wear in spring. So again, my plan of action is to finish the cloud sweater, start and finish the Elise scarf, then we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for sticking around. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you're having a wonderful day and I will see you in the next one. But before you go, please let me know in the comments what is your favorite comfort movie.